Okay, in this video, I'm going to show you how to take your files from different cameras and use the file that the ATEM Mini gives you and swap them over. In this case, it's going to go from the 1080p recordings to 4K. So the first thing I'm doing when I open Resolve is in a brand new library, I'm going to pull in the footage itself. So in this case, these two files are the two halves of the show from our hard camera. The next thing I'm going to do is quickly grab, this is the ATEM's recording, this is the ATEM's video ISO files, and I'm going to bring in every angle that we actually use in the show. In our case, it's 4 different camera angles, 2 halves per show. And then finally, on my desktop here, I have taken the files from 2 floor cameras, cam 1, cam 3, bring those in here as well. So the first thing we have to do is create new 4K files to work with that adhere to everything that we need to have in the file. The first thing is a time code, a starting time code. One thing to note very quickly is in this particular case, I took it off the BlackMagic RAW file here from the hard camera. This is not correct. You need to take it off one of the cameras, one of the files from the ISO recording itself. But you'll get, in that case, I have 2 different time codes, one from the first half of the show, one from the second half of the show. We're going to create a brand new timeline. We're not going to use the project settings. We're going to change stuff. By the way, when you import your files, you have to make sure that you tell it can change the frame rate, because obviously the frame rate that you filmed in is what you want your projects to be in. So for the first timeline that we're making here, we're putting the starting time code as the correct time code at the start of the first half. This is taken from one of the ISO recordings. We're going to name it, and we're going to name the file to be exactly the same as those files that we're going to be replacing. So in my case, it's Barry-0304 space cam space 1 space I think it says 01, something like that. It's hard to see on my screen at the moment. And we're also changing the resolution on there to be a 4K resolution, not a 1080p one. I'm going to go ahead, create another timeline. This is going to be the time code for the second half of the show. And again, I'm going to change the time code. I'm going to change the name of it to match the camera file from the second half of the show. And I'm also going to change the resolution to be 4K on here as well. So again, Barry-0304 space cam space 1 space 02. And I'm adding 4K on there so I can differentiate the files I'm creating. Okay, so we have a timeline for each half of the show. Now, the easiest way to manage this, I found, is literally just duplicate these timelines until we get 8 of them, and they've been renamed and organized here. Quick jump cut just to show you what's happening. And then here's how we're going to actually create these files. So this is the hard camera. This is a BlackMagic camera. This is a static camera. This is fed directly into the ATEM. I don't have to worry about any latency on this because this is just a straight SDI cable. This is not a wireless recording. So with my camera file in here, this is from the ATEM's recording itself. I'm going to find the distinctive mark, in this case when this light comes on. And I'm going to quickly tap through and get the correct frame. Here we go. So as soon as I see this light start to creep in here, I know that that's the point I want. I press M here to add a marker, and then I bring the actual original file from the camera directly itself into the preview window here. I'm going to go to the exact same point. Again, you can just tap through the arrow keys here to get the exact frame by frame that you need. And here we go. And now I press I. I creates an insert point. You can see the timeline kind of like has a little bit of adjustment there. And if we bring the insert point in and it'll snap directly onto that marker we created on the timeline, it's going to line up perfectly. You can see here as I switch the camera on and off, despite the fact that the B-RAW file is brighter because it doesn't have a LUT, sorry, it's darker because it doesn't have a LUT applied, it matches up pretty much perfectly. Zoom in here at the end of the timeline and trim. we need these to be exactly the same length down to the frame of the original file. It also has to have the correct audio on. I found that if I don't mute the camera file and I don't leave the audio as the ATEM ISO file, that DaVinci Resolve will have issues when you go to create your file later on. In this particular instance, you can color correct your camera files. For myself, I'm just adding a LUT to make the image brighter. I'll come back here, and yeah, you can see at this point it's exactly the same. So pretty straightforward stuff. Now, this is one of our floor cameras. We have to do this a little bit differently because the floor cameras are wireless, which means there's actually going to be several frames of latency. So whilst I've done the same thing here with a marker and then an insertion point, it's not going to be perfectly lined up to make other cameras. So I bring another ISO recording in that is lined up. This is the hard camera again. I find the exact same point that I'm looking for. And if I zoom in here, you can see just a couple of frames of latency. Pull your camera file over to adjust it, and then you'll be able to, just as before, kind of fill in the beginning part, trim the end, and now that camera file is not just matched up for what we need to do as far as creating these 4K files, but it's also now going to be correct frame to frame with the other camera files. So again, I'm going to mute them. You can see I've actually disabled the video track that I was using as a placement kind of guideline. And that's how we create one of the 4K files from the floor camera that's going to be good to use. So here we are in the delivery tab. This is a part where you're going to export your files. I do H.265 because the file size is dramatically smaller than H.264, and the M1 Max chip has no problem dealing with H.265 footage. You have to name the file the exact same as the one that we're starting with, and then just add 4K on the end there. Don't have .mp4 on the file name either. It's going to automatically create an MOV file. Once you've done that, you can add it to your render queue, and it'll go up here and it'll sit and it'll wait. Unlike Final Cut, you can't work whilst you're rendering files. So the next thing you will do is we'll go in, grab the next camera. In this case, here it is for the second one. Go in here and change our file name to 02 4K. Add that to our render queue. We'll do this for each of the different timelines that we've created here. So we're going to end up, when we go to our deliver queue and we finish doing this, we're going to have 8 different files. Here they are, all 8 files. This is 4 different cameras, 2 different halves, and we're going to set that going. Leave it going overnight if you need to, or just for a little bit of time. It's actually not that bad. The time looks bad here because I'm doing a screen recording at the same time. As soon as I stopped the screen recording, it went very quickly, and you can see here, now that they're completed, it took about 20 to 25 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, for each file that we've created. And now we've got 8 new files in our folder here. Dramatically smaller again. These like 25 gigabytes for just over an hour of footage per half. So next thing to do, open up the DaVinci Resolve file that we get from the ATEM itself. And it's going to open up, this is the 1080p project that it created automatically for us. I have this extra video track here because I have a downstream key on my ATEM, but we don't need to worry about that. So all we got to do is just go down here to where this video track is. You can see it. You got to make sure you're in the timeline here, the correct tab, and then we can just delete that. And then we're all good. This is the video track we need to get rid of. And I'll disable it so it doesn't create a video track on the XML file itself. So select the timeline, go up here to export, export the timeline, and you want to export it as a Final Cut file. This is FCP XML 1.9. Don't do 1.10. Save that XML file, go to your Finder. I usually save it in the root directory. I actually saved it with the video files here. It's not a huge problem. We can just grab this file and drop it into this directory. It makes things a little bit easier to work with. Okay, this XML file, if you double click it, it's going to open Final Cut. We don't want to open Final Cut yet. open it in a code editor of some sort. I use Nova for editing XML files. You can use Notepad if you want to. You just won't get the coloration, which makes things a little bit more difficult. Okay, for our timeline up here, the format has to change. The width for a 1080p is going to be 3840, and the height is 2160. So I'll change that. And then we have to change the this section here as well, the video format. It's not 1080p, it's going to be 3840 x 2160 p. And then the frame rate 5994 for us there. The next thing we're going to do then is we're going to do a find and replace. These are all of the original .mp4 files from the ISO. We need to change that. So instead of 01.mp4, we need to have 01.4k.mov. So just do a find and replace for .mp4 to 4k.mov and click replace all. And this is going to give us the XML file that we want. So now we'll go ahead. We're going to save as. Make sure you're saving it as the FCP XML file again, and add, in my case, 4K, or whatever makes it easy for you to differentiate for the work that you're doing. And then this is the file that we're going to double click to open in Final Cut. So Final Cut opens. Create a new library is what I typically do. You can add this to an existing library if you want to. It's basically storing information for a timeline. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to find where I want to save it. I'm going to give the file a name. And I typically will add 4K on there at some point as well, just so that it's a little bit more easy for me to organize when I'm going through and looking for stuff later on. I know what I can and cannot delete at the end of a project. So a couple of errors. I get these errors, and I'm going to address these a little bit later on. I have not found a way to solve this beyond making slightly longer halves. But one of the problems with the ATEM Mini, which no one talks about, is if you go over a minute 37, it actually splits the video files, and Resolve will seamlessly add them together. When you go to export it into another program like Final Cut, it will not work correctly, and everything after an hour and 37 minutes will not work, and you'll have to basically recreate from scratch. So as we can see here, selecting one of these camera angles and going to the inspector, this is a 4K file. It's a 4K timeline, and it is directing us to the 4K MOV files that were created. Next thing I do is, and this is kind of all extra at this point if you want to do this, but I have an ATEM file that I've made, sorry, a Final Cut file that I've made with a whole bunch of video and audio rolls in. I add this to my project, and then by going to the index over here, I have the ability to do a quick search for specific clips. So for my case, I want to differentiate all my camera angles. If I do cam 1, I now have every single file that is a cam 1 video file. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here so you can see all these different camera cuts. These are all of the different camera ones. And because of that file I imported, I can go over here to my video rolls and I can assign a video roll. It has a color, it makes it easy to spot. I'm going to do camera 2, select all of these, and I'm going to color code these as well. And then I'm going to speed it up a little bit here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to color code each video angle that I have. So in my case, I have 4 different video angles I actively work with. Now I'm going to bring in all of my audio from the show. And the audio also gets assigned audio roles. Again, color coded makes it easy to work with. And then I can quickly group that and bring that over here. And now if I need to adjust commentator's volume, if I need to adjust the bass in the crowd, I can do all of this in post as a result of it. So there's 2 reasons that I do the video color coding. Number 1 is I can now go in here and I can easily color correct using the index an entire camera angle. Unlike a traditional Final Cut multicam file, or if you're using the sync bin and Resolve, each of these are considered to be completely separate clips. So if I go in here, I'm just going to make an adjustment to the contrast here so you can clearly see what a change has been made. In order for me to have this apply to all of my video files, the way I would do it is I would, in this case, I would copy the video file that I've made the adjustment of, select all my video files, hold command and take away the one file that we've already changed. By holding Shift and then doing Command and V, we get the ability to paste attributes. I've pasted my color correction attributes, and you can see as I skim through, this one camera angle has all of these color attributes applied to it. I'm going to undo that really quickly. So that's one of the big advantages of doing this, is the ability to apply my color corrections. And obviously, you can also quickly find stuff as you go through that you might want to correct or change. So for myself, when I do a show, I have a piece of software I've written. It's called Segment Time, and it's on my website, that I run on one of the inputs for the ATEM. So it gets recorded along with the show. This has the ability for doing quite a lot when it comes to like timing out matches. We actually, for this particular location, we don't go into any of that detail. But one thing we do use is a SNES controller that's attached to a Raspberry Pi, and pressing the buttons will put these colored markers on. And these colored markers, they do have different reasons for them to show up. Red typically is an issue with talent. Blue is an issue with production, something like that. But what it allows me to do is go into the video file here. It's all synced up with the camera cuts, and I can go in and say, oh, I know what the issue is here. What I wanted to do is change this camera angle. I make a cut here, I don't like it, and I want to replace this one particular angle. Hold Option and pull up on one of the angles that you do like, and even though it's a clip, it acts the same way as any other clip in Final Cut. So now I can pull it across, and I can cover up the angle that I changed I didn't like, and that's how I can fix and correct my errors. I can find my errors from the show, taking exactly the point that the mistake was made. If you have a producer, you can get them to make a note and a timestamp as what it is that you're changing. And that's another reason that the color correction comes in very handy when it comes to these video rolls. So that's it. That's how I take the video files from an ATEM along with the DaVinci Resolve project that it creates. I upscale the footage to 4K without having to use BlackMagic cameras directly connected to the ATEM to do all of that. And it also allows me to go in post and make changes in the NLE of my choice, in this case, Final Cut Pro.